Okay, so I've opened up the actual project file of my Lumion for this project, and I just wanted to show you some of the other objects that I had placed within the scene. So you see how there's blue boxes when I move around? Those are the proxy objects that I mentioned earlier. So to make it quicker to navigate around the model, Lumion will automatically just replace objects with this blue box while you're moving around, and then it'll render up the high quality version when you get close to it. So a few things that I added, a bunch of water elements, and you can find those in this effects area. In order to see the library of elements that are available to you, you have to be on this place mode. So that will open up all of the effects that are available, and you can see there's fountains, fire, smoke, fog, and leaves. So you can go through those and you can adapt those into your model as you see fit. Those are really nice. So I also have a little bit of a fog effect to mimic the mist of the splash pad, which is visible in one of my views. I've also placed people around the model. So if we go over to people and animals, you can see there's a wide variety of different types of models here. Most of them are 3D. You can see women 3D, etc. And then there are a few elements that are actually just silhouettes. So if we go to the silhouette mode here, you can see that the people come in just as dark silhouettes. And if you want to alter them, you can actually change their color by selecting them and then going up here to color, and you can change those silhouettes to whatever color you want for your view. So if you don't feel like having realistic people in your view, you just want to have some silhouettes, you can control them here. You could also control their transparency in case you didn't want real people, you just wanted ghosts. So make sure you turn the shadow on if you're going to use silhouette people. I think that's really important and something you might not know to do. It would look really strange if you had silhouettes without shadows in your view. So I don't even know why they're turned off by default, but supposedly it's for other architectural types of drawings instead of renderings. I have a bunch of trees. Some of them are from Lumion. Some of them are models that I have imported myself from high quality files that I've paid for and downloaded. So you won't have all of the same models available to you as I have, but there is plenty to choose from within the library itself. So just to quickly go through all of the objects you can have, there's natural objects, and again, we have to be on place mode to actually see the library. And everything has pages and subpages, so you can go through that. But using the objects is the same no matter what type of object it is. You can move it around, you can rotate it and scale it. You can't really do much else with it. There's a few objects that you can change the color of, but again, you can't do any detailed snapping. This isn't a modeling program, so it's really just about placing elements and then kind of scaling them according to the model. One note about scale is that, interestingly, it doesn't really matter what unit your base model is in. Like, for example, ours was in feet and inches, and Lumion operates on a metric scale, but everything, like all the people and the elements, are correctly sized to this model. I don't know what AI magic they use to determine that, but I have found that I have never really had to fiddle around with sizes of things as long as my base model has been drawn in a correct scale. So, or in it to real world units is what I should say. So if you were drawing a model and you had made it like 100 times smaller than it should be, obviously you'll have issues when you bring it into Lumion. But if you're drawing in real world units, no matter what those units are, whether they're feet or inches or millimeters or meters, you don't have to worry about the importing of the model. So there's another option called Fine Detail Nature, and within this library you have elements like trees and grasses and plants that are much more highly detailed than the regular sort of Lumion objects. So you can check those out too, but they are energy intensive. So again, I would reserve those for like foreground elements only, but they are really, really nice and really well modeled. So those can be good options if you're looking for foreground element planting that you would normally be trying to do in Photoshop instead. So in the people section, again, there is another option here for billboards. So these are people 2D. These are basically PNG people that have been turned into components that follow the camera around, and you can place those onto your model. And basically they will follow your camera no matter where it is. So if you turn it around, the person is still gonna kind of be facing towards the camera. So those are made to orbit around with you. And that's really helpful. So the only thing to note about that is their inherent coloration and light scenario might be different from what you have in your model. So for example, in this case, the sunlight is coming from up there, casting a shadow down, but there's a shadow on this side. So this doesn't really make sense with the lighting scenario. So that's what you have to be cautious about when you're using billboards, is that the lighting scenario doesn't always make sense for where they're facing. And there's no way to like flip this guy around and turn him around. So like even if I use any of these scale and orientation devices, like none of them work. So it doesn't change the model at all. So you can't do anything with these billboard 2D components. They just are the way they are. So other things are furnishings, and there's tons of stuff within these indoor libraries. You can explore those, but I really don't use any indoor stuff. And in fact, there's an outdoor library as well, which has benches and lights and things like that. I would really recommend you don't use a lot of these components, or use them in the background, but I wouldn't use them as foreground elements. It's not because they're bad models, it's just that they're very highly standardized. And so, for example, if I was to use this bench, I think that people would be able to like identify this as a Lumion rendering, because this library is, well, it looks extensive upon first glance. Once you start putting things in, you realize that like they're very identifiable as components. So, you know, this stuff is great, and I would definitely use it for background elements, but I try not to use many of these models in my view, or I use them just very sparingly, because they are pretty typical components, and they have their uses, but just be cautious that it can look like you're really just kind of assembling an image from off-the-shelf elements if you use a lot of these built-in models. There are cars and trucks and all kinds of other types of vehicles here. Whenever you see this like little panel, it means something can be colorized, or they have their inherent color changed. I have, in my model that I'm working with, removed a lot of the poorly detailed cars from the Rhino model and then replaced them with Lumion cars. These just show up in the background, but I wanted them to look a little bit better, because you can see the ones that were in the Rhino model are a little bit boxy and not super detailed, whereas the ones from Lumion, they look like actual cars. They have reflection maps, they even have drivers in them. This is a component that I've imported myself. So remember your imported models, which would include your actual site model itself, which is here. You can see that there. And then any other element that you have imported yourself, whether that's people, PNG, billboards, or SketchUp models, or other types of components. They'll all show up if you're highlighted on the imported models. So this is one of them. I have this food truck that comes in handy for a lot of renderings. We have lights. Lights you probably won't really need to deal with in this scenario, because you're probably going to be doing mostly daylight renderings. And then there's a few little things here. So there's effects, which I briefly referred to before, but you can find water effects and smoke effects and things like that. You can also have sound, and this is more for video. If you're creating animations, there's some sounds built in here. Then we have in the utilities, there's a bunch of tools that can help you. So I haven't really explored a lot of these, but if you were doing orthographic drawings like a section or a plan or something, you might want to use some of these. I'll cover those in a later tutorial, but for what we're doing right now, we don't really need any of that stuff.